Coming in at 5, American Psycho 2 All-American Girl 2002. Also known more aptly as American Psycho 2, this sequel directed by Morgan J. Freeman is a horror black comedy starring Mila Kunis and William Shatner. Quite the pair, I know. The plot follows a girl named Rachel Newman who has developed a taste for murder and will stand at nothing to become a college professor's assistant. Honestly, even reading the plot hurts my soul. The film was adapted from a script titled The Girl Who Wouldn't Die and was originally conceived as a thriller with no association whatsoever with American Psycho. I wish it had stayed that way, and I think everyone else does too. It wasn't until production began that the film's script was altered to include the Patrick Bateman subplot. The film was such a failure it received 11% on Rotten Tomatoes, with Rob Gonzalez stating, I quote, "American Psycho 2 wasn't even supposed to be an American Psycho sequel, for Christ's sake." Lionsgate noticed that the first film got critical acclaim and didn't do too poorly in theaters, so they dusted off an unrelated script and modified it to link it tenuously to the first film. As you would expect, Mila Kunis faced a lot of embarrassment when the film came out, humiliated that the film was linked to such a cult classic. I quote, "Please somebody stop this, write a petition. When I did the second one, I didn't know it would be American Psycho 2. It was supposed to be a different project and it was re-edited. Yikes. Sucks to be Mila, I guess." Coming in at 4, Pet Sematary 2 1992. Directed by Mary Lambert, Pet Sematary 2 is the sequel to the 1989 film Pet Sematary and stars Edward Furlong, Anthony Edwards and Clancy Brown. Following the accidental death of his mother Renee, 13-year-old Jeff Matthews and his veterinarian father Chase moved to Ludlow, Maine, his mother's hometown, where he is introduced to the story of the Creed family and the legend of the infamous burial grounds. The film is essentially attempting to rehash what made the original movie so great, however, it does this without any new or original ideas. All in all, new undead victims rise up out of the Indian cemetery and seek revenge on the living. Same old, same old. It currently holds a steady 24% on Rotten Tomatoes, with an average 3.8 out of 10. The film fails to tell any kind of coherent story and lacks any real character development, and instead seems too busy perfecting its special effects. Kevin Thomas of the LA Times wrote, I quote, "Not nearly as scary as the 1989 original. It nonetheless expresses and attempts to resolve in bold mythological terms the anxiety of being 13. I'm not here for that. Like I always say when it comes to Pet Sematary, sometimes dead is better, and this film proves that. Don't waste your time. If you want to watch the same thing done correctly, just watch the original. Coming in at 3, Jaws The Revenge 1987. Also known as Jaws 4 The Revenge or Jaws 4, this trash bag of a movie was produced and directed by Joseph Sargent and starred Lorraine Gary, Lance Guest, Mario Van Peebles and Michael Caine. Yeah, the one and only Michael Caine. The plot focuses on a now widowed Ellen Brody and her conviction that a great white shark is seeking revenge on her family, particularly when it kills her son and follows her to the Bahamas. The film was of course heavily panned by critics and by me, which likely counts for more, in my opinion. Unlike the 3 other films in the Jaws series, Jaws The Revenge was made in less than 9 months, according to associate producer and production manager Frank Bauer. During the sequel's filming, I quote, "This will be the fastest I have ever seen a major film planned and executed in all of my 35 years as a production manager." That says a lot. The film to this day remains one of the few to hold a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, with an average rating of 2 out of 10. Respect. The film as a whole was illogical and lacked any sort of tension, and had perhaps some of the worst special effects I've ever seen in cinema. Roger Ebert stated, I quote, "It is not simply a bad movie but also a stupid and incompetent one. And honestly guys, that's all you really need to know. It is pretty much just a laughable B-level horror movie with a splash of Michael Caine romance thrown into the mix. Makes no sense." Coming in at 2, Texas Chainsaw Massacre The Next Generation 1995. You probably haven't heard of this movie, and that's okay. You will find out why very soon. Texas Chainsaw Massacre The Next Generation was released in 1995 and starred Renee Zellweger, Matthew McConaughey and Robert Jacks as Leatherface. The plot follows 4 teens who encounter Leatherface and his murderous family in backwoods Texas on the night of their prom. The film was screened before being ultimately shelved by Columbia Pictures. 2 years later though, it was recut and released long after Zellweger and McConaughey had both become major Hollywood stars. However, the film was still a critical failure and was the final installment in the series. To quote a very apt commentator on IMDb, Watching this movie is like having someone kick you in the head for 2 hours only to find out that you have just survived the warm-up session and the worst is yet to come. Straight savagery, right? Upon the movie's release, much of the critical reviews focus on the lead performances of Zellweger and McConaughey. Janet Maslin of the New York Times wrote, I quote, "It was way back in '95 that his schlocky horror face, then known as Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, first appeared with the unknown actors Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger in starring roles. But even in a film whose principal props include little old pizza slices and a black plastic trash bag, it's clear that these two were going places. Honestly, this film is an absolute train wreck and should be avoided at all costs. If you want to watch a good movie, watch the original or even the Jessica Biel version. In my opinion, I think that's the better one. Come for me." Finally, coming in at number 1, Exorcist II: The Heretic, 1977. If you're not familiar with Exorcist II or even aware that there was a sequel or multiple, don't fret. That's okay, you well and truly dodged a bullet. Exorcist II was released back in '97 and followed an older Reagan, once possessed by a demon, who finds that it still lurks within her. Meanwhile, a priest investigates the death of the girl's exorcist. Of course, being a sequel to a movie that was hailed as one of the greatest horror films of all time is tough. However, some sequels work out, surprisingly. This one, however, fell short and is so bad that many prefer to classify it as an unintentional comedy. Reprising her role as Reagan McNeil, the film stars Linda Blair, Richard Burton, and James Earl Jones. The film received strongly negative response, with audiences even laughing at its premiere in New York City. Surprisingly though, writer of the novel and director of Exorcist III, William Peter Blatty, claimed to have been the first person to start laughing at the theatre in which he saw the film, only to be followed by everyone else. Director of the first Exorcist, William Friedkin, even recalled hearing a story in which angry audience members chased down Warner Brothers executives on the street within the first 10 minutes of the screening. He went on to state, I quote, "I was at a Technicolor and a guy said, 'We just finished a print of Exorcist II, do you want to have a look at it?' And I looked at half an hour of it, and I thought it was as bad as seeing a traffic accident in the street. It was horrible. It's just a stupid mess made by a dumb guy. John Borman by name, somebody who should be nameless but in this case should be named." Whoa. Shots fired by Friedkin, but I respect that. As of right now, Exorcist II: The Heretic has a 3.8 out of 10 on IMDb and 16% on Rotten Tomatoes. Sucks. Coming in at number 5, Troll 2. Yes, you can all sleep easy tonight. I am finally including Troll 2, a movie you guys were furious that I didn't include in part 1. Released in 1990, this comedy horror centers on a family pursued by vegetarian goblins who seek to mutate them into plants so that they can eat them. Yeah, it hurts even describing it, which is why this movie is considered to be one of the worst movies ever made. Where still, the sequel has nothing to do with the original movie. Maybe that's probably for the best. Troll 2 is instead completely nonsensical, seemingly made by people who have no idea how human beings talk or interact. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds a rating of 6%, with many viewers turning scenes and moments into memes. We all know what I'm talking about. Editors, you know the meme. It's like the boy in the glasses and he's looking up and he's like, you know the one. Chris, you know the one, right? Yeah. Chris knows the one. However, the redeeming factor about this movie is that it falls into the category of it's so bad, it's good, making it the only movie on our entire list that you should actually watch. Do it for the memes. In at number 4, Halloween Resurrection. Right off the bat, I should say this film is pure trash, and sadly I owned this movie on DVD before growing wise and tossing it into a fire pit. Released in 2002, Halloween Resurrection is set in the original House of Horrors, aka the dilapidated home of the infamous serial killer Michael Myers, which has now become the set of a webcam reality show. But when the veteran slasher discovers that a group of university students have taken over his old killing grounds, he decides it's time to bring the blades out of retirement. Now this is the 8th installment in the franchise and arguably the worst, with the movie receiving just 11% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the New York Post saying, I quote, "It's so devoid of joy and energy it makes even Jason X look positively Shakespearean by comparison." Whoa. Shots were well and truly fired. Not just that, but the movie completely undoes what Halloween H2O established by officially removing Jamie Lee Curtis from the franchise, which in turn angered a lot of longtime fans. I know fans may complain about Rob Zombie's bizarre remake of the original film, but at least it was better than this crap and didn't feature Michael Myers fighting Busta Rhymes. Coming in at 3, Freddys Dead: The Final Nightmare. Released in 1991, Freddys Dead follows the murderous ghoul Freddy Krueger, who has slaughtered every last child in his hometown. So he returns once again to prowl the nightmares of Springwood's last surviving teenagers, and of a woman whose personal connection to Krueger may mean his doom. Now, almost all franchises reach a point where they stop being good and start being a joke. Freddy reached that relatively early on, probably around 2. Although personally I'm a huge fan of Dream Warriors, I know that most people aren't. However, Freddys Dead is the standout for the worst of the worst, with the movie being more comedic than scary, particularly the scene where Freddy straps on a power glove and plays a video game. What a joke. Sadly, at the time of its release, it was the final Freddy film in the franchise, leaving fans underwhelmed at the demise of Freddy, who failed to go out with a bag, was instead dispatched by a stick of dynamite. It felt lazy and at the time like the franchise had completely given up on itself. However, a few years later came Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which in my opinion is the second best Freddy film, right behind the original. Quote me on that. The reason being because aside from the first movie, this was the only other movie in the franchise to be directed by Wes Craven himself. That speaks wonders. Coming in at number 2, Hellraiser Revelations. Released in 2011, Hellraiser Revelations follows two friends who discover a puzzle box in Mexico which unleashes the Cenobite Pinhead. Now, what's painful about this is that no movie franchise has gone from cult classic to unwatchable as fast as Hellraiser, which is upsetting considering how fantastic the very first movie was. I mean, I assume most of you watched my It Came From the 80s about it. I hope so. Saying that, attempting to pick the worst movie out of a bad franchise was tough, but easier than you would think, simply because Revelations is the 9th and final film in the series, aside from Hellraiser Judgment. Now, I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me because there are honestly so many bad Hellraiser movies in the franchise, but this one easily takes the cake in my opinion. What makes the movie so interesting though is the simple fact that its production story is the reason it's so high on our list. Written, shot and released over the course of a few months on a shoestring budget, specifically $350,000. Yep. The film was solely made so that the studio could hold on to the Hellraiser rights, as part of their plan to produce a remake of the original film. It was made for such cynical reasons that Doug Bradley, who starred as Pinhead in every single one of the movies up until this point, declined to join. That speaks wonders. All in all, don't check it out because you will be disappointed. And finally, coming in at number 1, Leprechaun 4 in Space. Released in 1996, Leprechaun 4 in Space is perhaps one of the worst movies ever made. Quote me on that. Resurfacing on an alien planet, the Leprechaun abducts a member of the world's royalty, Princess Serena, in an attempt to wed her and become the supreme ruler. Now, I should preface by saying that in no way does the film want you to take it seriously. However, that does not excuse it from being a genuinely bad movie. The Leprechaun franchise up until this point was goofy and fun and never any good, but still nonetheless enjoyable. But the fourth entry takes the franchise to all new lows, offering terrible comedy in the process. The film as a whole is boring and low quality, not to mention the production design just looks cheap. The script is a shamble and the pace is so poor that its short running time feels like 3 to 4 hours long. And don't even get me started on the comedy, which isn't even comedy. We all love a bad movie once in a while, but this isn't even close to being so bad it's good. It's just so bad it should end up in the trash kind of movie. Please don't give in to temptation. Don't give it what it wants. Coming in at number 5, Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, 1987. Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2 is a 1987 black comedy slasher film edited, written and directed by Lee Harry and is a direct sequel to the 1984 Silent Night, Deadly Night. The plot focuses on Ricky Caldwell, the brother of Billy Chapman, and his own trauma regarding his parents' Christmas Eve murders, which triggers his own killing spree. Much like a movie later on our list, the film relies heavily on flashbacks, utilizing around 25 minutes of archive footage from the original movie. Now, the filmmakers tried to cover the awful job they did on the movie by blaming the dismal amount of money they were paid to make it. Originally, they say, they were told to re-edit the first film and pass it off as a sequel. However, that didn't happen, thank God. Upon release, the film was heavily panned due to the excessive use of footage from the original, and on Rotten Tomatoes, the film has a 0% rating with an average score of 3 out of 10. Take my word for it, this film is utter trash and will forever remain that way. Speaking of trash, in at number 4, The Stepfather 3 Father's Day, 1992. Now, right off the bat, I should preface by saying this movie is pure trash. There are no two ways about it. It's trash every day of the week. Stepfather 3 is a 1992 slasher film directed and written by Guy Mager. It is the second sequel to the 1987's The Stepfather and concerns the titular serial killer seeking out yet another all-American family to become a part of, using plastic surgery to disguise himself from the authorities, aka to cover the fact that the original actor did not want to reprise his role in this film. Now, reviews of the film varied, which is surprising because I was expecting all bad, but alas, we can't have everything. Tony Scott from Variety stated, I quote, "The film lurches on without much credibility," before going on to say, "Blood spurts, but director Guy Mager doesn't make the horror convincing. The simplistic storyline and the unconvincing portrayal by Whiteman haven't been enhanced by indifferent production values." Yikes. To this date, the film has only ever been released on DVD in Germany, with no plans being made to release it in the United States. That's savage, and says a lot. Also, the tagline of the movie is, I don't even want to say it, "Daddy's been working in the garden again." Lol. It's a film I want to watch. In at number 3, The Amityville Curse, 1990. The Amityville Curse is a supernatural horror directed by Tom Berry and starring Kim Coates. It is loosely based on the novel of the same name by Hans Holzer and is the 5th film in the Amityville film series. The plot centers on 5 people who spend the night in an abandoned haunted home in Amityville, New York, and soon find themselves terrorized by assorted ghosts, venomous insects, and ghostly spirits. Now, the film is interesting, but in all the wrong ways. It features a different haunted house and a different background than the rest of the series. Even though it is set in Amityville, New York, it is not actually 112 Ocean Avenue, the original setting of the movie. The house used is a completely different house. The movie also has a plot and backstory that is unique to this movie and is no way connected to its predecessors. Now, the movie is so bad because it attempts to build up an intriguing mystery but falls flat in the process. It also attempts to skip over gaping plot holes but falls even harder. Overall, it is an awful movie that does not deserve your attention. Coming in at number 2, The Birds 2, Land's End, 1994. I bet most of you had zero idea this was a movie, and honestly, I'm envious of all of you. I wish I didn't know about this film. The Birds 2, Land's End is a 1990 made-for-TV horror movie directed by Rick Rosenthal under the pseudonym of Alan Smithee. For those who don't know, Alan Smithee is an official pseudonym used by film directors who wish to disown a project. Anyway, the plot of the sequel is very similar to the original. Biology teacher and Somali Civil War veteran Ted and his wife and children move to a summer house on an island after the death of their son. While there, flocks of birds start attacking individuals for no apparent reason. The town mayor denies the birds' role in the injuries, but is forced to believe after further incidents of violence by the birds. Now, surprisingly, Tippi Hedren, star of the original movie, actually appeared as a supporting role, but not as her original character. Hedren was actually disappointed that she did not get a starring role, even stating, I quote, "I wish that it was more than a cameo. I think they made a mistake by not doing that, but it has helped me to feed my lions and tigers." Weird flex, but okay. The film of course received widely negative reviews, with the general consensus being, I quote, "The actors in Birds 2 have little to do except widen their eyes in terror, and even that seems a daunting stretch for Johnson." Oof. I felt that. Tippi Hedren went on to say that the movie was absolutely horrible and utterly embarrassing to her. So, sucks. And finally coming in at number 1, Boogeyman II, 1983. Directed by Bruce Pern, also known as Bruce Starr, also co-directed by Uli Lemennel, and is a direct sequel to the 1980 film The Boogeyman. Now, the first movie wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't something you would return to in a hurry. The sequel, however, recaps the entire first movie, which comprises around 40 minutes of the 79-minute runtime. I wish I was joking, but I'm not. Now, where still the first movie is supposedly based on true events, with the filmmakers attempting to recreate what occurred, and after a piece of broken glass appears from the first movie, killings begin again. The movie is as cheesy and predictable as you would expect, but what makes it so bad is that it's just straight up boring. If you don't believe me, the film has an awful 11% on Rotten Tomatoes. Through long and extremely detailed flashbacks, which in my opinion is cheating, Lacey tells the story about the murderous spirit in the little piece of mirror to befriended actress and her husband director. Of course, like any dumb people in horror movies, they want to exploit Lacey's bizarre story and turn it into a horror movie, but then along comes the boogeyman to kill them all during a typical Hollywood pool party. What a shame. Guys, I honestly can't stress enough how terrible this movie is, and how painful it was to watch around 50 minutes of stock footage on my screen. If you want more entertainment, just pull up Shutterstock. Just saying.